All right. Hey, guys. We'll get started here in a few minutes. Hey, if you can hear me, can you just write something in the chat? Just let me know that it's working, that you can see me and hear me. Perfect. All right, cool. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we'll give it another minute or two. People might come rolling in here. This would be a good opportunity to orient yourself with the system. So several of you guys have already found the chat feature there. It's on the right side. There's the chat, there's questions, there's a polls feature. There'll be a few polls that I'll give you guys later. So I just want to click that button to vote there for the polls. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please use the questions tab. That's what I'll be monitoring. I might be able to answer them as I'm speaking, or we might save them towards the end, but I won't be watching the chat during the presentation, but I'll keep my eye on the questions tab here, just in case there's, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in there. So again, we'll just give it one more minute here, and then we'll get rolling. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So also want to say this is social media friendly, so feel free to grab screenshots during the presentation or afterwards, and you can post them on Instagram, Twitter. I put my personal Twitter account as well as Fit's Twitter account in the chat there, so you can feel free to share and tag us in it. That'd be great. I think concussions are obviously a really important topic, and preventing them, I think, is important as well, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So anyways, feel free to share as we get going. So introduce myself here. My name is Kyle Davey. I'm a strength and performance coach based out of Salem, Oregon, where I work here and I work with athletes. I have particular interest in speed development and injury prevention. And I enjoy technology and sports science as well. So I'm really happy to be able to present this information to you guys because I think it's really important. And I think we'll make that point kind of throughout the presentation here. So just a real brief overview of what you're getting into by watching. We'll talk about sorry. Sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what you're seeing on your end, but on my end, like the browser, it's like continuing to refresh. So that was kind of weird. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So I think I'm still here. Can you guys let me know in the chat one more time if you can still hear me? Okay, thanks. No, we're good to go. We're gonna keep rolling. So yeah, that was strange. All right, anyways, quick overview of what you're getting yourself into here. So we're gonna talk about the importance of a coordinated neck with force and rate of force development, neck mobility and athlete health. We talk about mobility in a lot of different areas, but the neck really doesn't get that much attention, really hardly at all from a strength or mobility perspective. At least what I've noticed in the strength and conditioning community. So we'll be talking about that here, talking about the cervical visual and the vestibular interactions. All right. Hey, really, I'm not sure what's going on here, but just did something different. So I'm really hoping that's going to be the last time that happens. I don't know. This didn't happen on the test run, so this is just real strange. Okay, we're just going to move forward, right? Cervical vestibular interactions. You guys probably read the slide in the time, so we're gonna march onward. Okay, what if we're going to start with our polls here? So go ahead and go to that polls tab there. If it were possible to mitigate concussion risk with training methods, would you consider adding such methods to your programming? You guys should be able to vote in that poll now. Cool. All right. I think those results are speaking for themselves. We got 100% of people saying yes, they would. All right. We'll go ahead and close that one. Good. And here's a follow-up poll. If it were possible to mitigate concussions with training, would we have an ethical responsibility to do it? I think the responsibility is an interesting discussion. There's all kinds of discussions about what the role of a strength coach is. Is it to improve performance? Is it to win games? Is it to do this, do that? I'm not necessarily certain there's a right or a wrong answer here, but I just want to see what you guys think. All right, we got a few no's in there. Good. All right, looks like just a few more votes trickling in. So it looks like 83%, most people are saying yes, but there's a few no's in there. All right. Okay, we'll go ahead and turn that off. All right, so moving forward. Hey, from an anatomical perspective, the neck and the cervical spine is really complicated. It's really intricate. I'm not going to give you a full overview here. That would take forever and wouldn't use your time well. But there's a lot going on. From the big picture, the superficial muscles, both on the anterior and the posterior side, and then obviously we're seeing the lateral side here. The superficial muscles are kind of the big force generators. Those are the prime movers. Those are really the heavy hitters. And the deeper muscles, those guys are responsible more for local stabilization, more so than like global movement. Other thing to note about the cervical spine is that it's the most unstable and most mobile segment of the spine. So I know like stability has become a buzzword. Thankfully, I feel like that's kind of behind us at this point. But in this case, when we say it's the most unstable, that just means it's the least resistant to movement, right? So if you get pushed in your head, like your neck is going to move pretty easily versus if you get pushed in your chest or your lower back, those parts of your segment, they're not going to move quite as easily. So because the neck is both the most mobile and the most unstable, because it's both the most mobile and the most unstable segment of the spine, it calls a little bit of a tension there in my mind that I might need a little bit extra strengthening or a little bit of extra support through the training. All right. As I started diving into this neck literature, I was really surprised at how important of a role the neck plays from a neural perspective as well. And so it gave an image of a lighthouse, both probably because the neck somewhat resembles a lighthouse physically, kind of tall and slender. But when I think about a lighthouse, to me, if you're standing at the top, I mean, the lighthouse illuminates what's happening around you in the darkness, right? And the neck somewhat does that for our brain as well, in the sense that the neck is really, really dense with vestibular sensory receptors as well as oculomotor receptors. So there's afferent sensory signals that's being sent to our brain from our neck. And to me, our brain integrates our sensory input and then it generates an image and an understanding of the world around us. And that's basically how our brain works, right? That's how we operate in our world. And so as I learned more about the neck and how important it is from a sensory perspective, that really opened my mind, opened my eyes to how important the neck really is, not only in life, but also obviously in athletic performance, because we have to have high quality sensory inputs in order to generate high quality physical outputs as well. So the lighthouse thing just makes a lot of sense to me because we're illuminating what's happening around us from a sensory perspective. So again, with a lot of vestibular interactions and oculomotor interactions, clearly the neck is really important for both your vestibular, your balance system, as well as your visual system. And those can't be under the roles that those systems play in sports performance can't be undermined. And we can see a little bit of how neck works in nature as well. So we got a cheetah here. He's probably turning a corner at, 60, 70 miles an hour, kicking up dust in his back. And we can see that his body is slanted there. He's doing a little a curve run. He's doing an S run here. He's running the curve on a track. But his head is obviously pretty well vertical compared to the ground. Obviously, his cervical spine is not in neutral compared to the rest of the spine because his body is curved, but he's able to maintain his upright position with his head, again, through that neck interaction. Obviously, this is important because, well, try turning your head and watching this webinar. I mean, you can do it, but it's not very comfortable. Things look different. Now, imagine doing that at 70 miles an hour, turning a curve as a cheetah, or imagine doing it as an athlete here, right? Having your head stay focused and stay level gives you the ability to see and understand the space around you at a higher level, at a higher perceptive level than if your head is tilted. So we see this in nature here. It's a pretty cool video. I'll show you guys here quickly as well. A colleague sent this to me. So notice how the head of the bird stays fixed while the body is moving around it. Now, obviously, we're not birds, but I do think it's cool to see how the neck interacts in nature, and it's telling to how the neck also interacts with us as humans. So I'll show you one more picture of a wild animal here. You guys probably recognize this one. Of course, Patrick Mahomes. This is in the Super Bowl a couple years ago when they played against the Buccaneers. See if I can get my video back up here. Oh. So that picture of Patrick Mahomes, it's a couple years ago in the Super Bowl. They're playing against the Bucs. It's late in the game. It's in the fourth quarter. They're down by about 3 scores. He gets flushed out of the pocket. He's rolling out to his right, doing what he does best, just being an athlete and making plays. He gets tripped up. He finds himself midair. He's probably about a foot off the ground in this position. And he makes just this absolutely incredible throw midair from this position, hits the receivers right on the money in the end zone. Unfortunately, he drops the pass, but it's just an amazing play by Patrick Mahomes. And if you look at his body, obviously he's slanted, but his head is relatively upright. You see this from a cool angle here as well. It's pretty much the same, almost nearly the same moment. It's the same play, obviously. And we see the defender there. Patrick's putting the ball right in the gap, right on the money. And we can see here that his head is being held upright, even though the rest of his body is almost completely perpendicular to the ground. So again, just a freak display of freak athleticism by Mahomes, and his neck holding the head up is part of what allows him to make such a great play. With his head being tilted this way, like most of us would be in this position falling, I don't think we're even registering from an affordance perspective that making a throw is even an option for us. But Mahomes, because he's a freak athlete, I'm sure he's had great training in his career. Lots of reasons go into why he's able to do this. But part of it is also being able to hold his head up. He's able to understand what's happening around him. And he's able even just to register that he has an opportunity to make a play. Again, just an absolutely amazing play from a freak athlete, partly because of his head being held up there. So what else can the neck do for us from a performance perspective, other than obviously moving the head? This was a really interesting paper by Boynton and Carrier from last year. I believe they're based out of Utah. Paper got published last year in 2022. And they had this wild hypothesis. I would love to speak with them and to know what went into their minds to even think this, but they had this wild hypothesis that the neck musculature could actually help stabilize the pelvis during athletic movements like accelerating, braking, and jumping. So this is their basically an overview of their hypothesis. And so to study this, they borrowed a protocol from 1999. This picture is from that 1999 paper, and it looks very 1999. It's basically like an old school bungee cord, like old school overspeed training is what they're doing here. So the person's on the treadmill, obviously. There's a bungee cord attached to them, and this bungee is trying to pull them off the treadmill, basically. So as they're running, it's like they're braking or running downhill, basically. They're having to brake in order just to stay on the treadmill. And so they did this, and then they had them turn the opposite direction, and then they're running out against the bungee cord, similar to like a 1080 resisted sprint or some other form of resisted sprint, a sled pull, something like that. Then they studied the neck interactions with the pelvis. It's a really clever study, and they did different things, weighting the head and such. And long story short, what they found was that the neck indeed does play a role in stabilizing the pelvis. Basically, the posterior neck musculature stabilizes against posterior pelvic tilt during acceleration, and the anterior neck musculature stabilizes against anterior pelvic tilt during braking. So to me, this is really telling. This is really a powerful point here, because if we know that the neck can actually influence our pelvis during real sporting movements like accelerating and during braking and during jumping, where else can the neck play a role in performance? And how big of a role does the neck play in actions like accelerating, top speed, maximum speed, braking? To me, just this paper to me kind of opens the door and opens my mind, at least, to exploring a little bit more things that I wouldn't have thought about before, like can the neck actually play a role in sprint speed and sprint performance? It's a very interesting question. There's at least some data that would suggest yes. And it's also makes me wonder about change of direction. Here's this guy. Most of us are going to recognize him, Barry Sanders. He's even a little bit before my time, but I've definitely seen all his highlight reels. Most electric player, probably of all time, right? If the neck plays a role in stabilizing the pelvis, in acceleration and braking and jumping, what role does it play in changing directions? The neck musculature obviously prevents your head from flying forward upon decelerating, but what role might it play during other change of direction actions, right? Like a cut step or something like that? Could the neck be a rate limiter in deceleration or in change of direction? Meaning, if my neck is not strong enough to hold my head in place while I'm changing directions, then as I hit the brakes, right, my head is going to come flying forward as if it's trying to fly off my body. Might that be a rate limiter in some of these performance? If my brain knows that I'm unable to control that action, will it really let me express that change of direction in full force if my head's flying all over the place? Again, this sounds kind of like a strange question, but when you think about how important your vestibular system is, your visual system is, having a stable head is really an important feature to be able to understand the world around you. So our bodies don't really want to put us in positions where our head is going to be unstable. And if changing direction kind of puts us in that position, I just wonder if there's performance implications there, and if neck strength could potentially be a rate limiter there. This is a really interesting slide. So I am back here. This is a really interesting paper. Again, this is from it's 2021 paper, and they had the idea that a bicep, like your arm bicep, right, biceps brachii, could work together with the neck in order to stabilize the head during running. And it was relatively slow speed running. I think it was like 6.8 miles per hour that they were testing or something like that. So it was relatively slow, but sure enough, what they found was that the biceps and the superior trap, they work together in order to stabilize your neck and therefore the head while running. To me, this was fascinating. When I read the paper at first, or a colleague sent me this picture, I was like, what in the world, what role could a bicep play in stabilizing a head while running? It made no sense to me, but as I read it and as I started understanding and thinking about it a little bit more, sure enough, it does make a certain amount of sense in the sense that the superior trap inserts in a similar place as where the biceps originates, if that makes sense, both sort of on the anterior aspect of the shoulder here. And essentially what they do is they just contract and they pull against each other on opposite sides. It's like pulling a string. You grab it on one end, you grab it on the other, you pull it taut, and now that string it's tight. It's not going to move anymore. So as the superior trap contracts this way, the bicep contracts and exudes like a downward force this way. That's what we're seeing in the far right image there. That just creates a stability and a little bit of tension in the head in order to hold the head steady while you're running. And this presentation isn't about biceps. This presentation is about concussion. So what are we talking about here? To me, this just further illustrates the link between the neck and the rest of our body. Not only is it a physical bridge between your head and your torso, obviously, but if the neck can interact with our bicep in order to stabilize the head, if our neck can interact with the torso core musculature in order to stabilize the pelvis, what other implications, where else is the neck important? We know it's important visually, we know it's important vestibularly, it works with the bicep, it works with other musculature to stabilize our pelvis. Understanding these things opened my mind a little bit more to be more open to understanding what other roles the neck could play, not only in concussion prevention, but in high performance as well. Now, from a pain perspective, it's long been known that those with chronic pain, they're associated with visual and vestibular deficits. So tension headaches, lower vision scores, even things like acuity, vertigo-like symptoms, dizziness. If you have chronic neck pain, you're more likely to experience those symptoms. And that makes sense given how dense the receptors are, the vestibular receptors and the oculomotor receptors in your neck. If there's dysfunction there, then those systems might those systems might also be downregulated or affected. And neck stiffness and also neck fatigue, muscular fatigue, alters your sensory input to your CNS, to the sensory system. And there's a ton of references provided at the bottom slides of this presentation. I encourage you guys to go dive in. To me, this is a huge point. If fatigue in my neck, muscular fatigue, alters sensory input to my CNS, that means we're having vestibular input altered, we're having oculomotor input altered. So now my balance system, my visual system are potentially compromised based on neck fatigue. That's fascinating. So if the neck gets tired, then there's clear potential performance decrements or performance impairments that might occur along the way. Sure enough, we also see that neck fatigue impairs postural and oculomotor control. This has been verified. And interestingly, fascinatingly, neck fatigue and stiffness also decrease upper extremity accuracy and joint proprioception. So essentially what these researchers did, it's a lab test, but what they did is they did like a joint accuracy task where they're essentially kind of like connecting dots on like a board. And then they fatigued the neck muscles, they had them close their eyes, and they did it again, eyes open, eyes closed, with the neck fatigued and not fatigued. And what they found was that in the neck fatigued condition, both with eyes open and eyes closed, accuracy was worse, meaning joint proprioception was worse. Essentially, the ability to reproduce the same positions got worse in the fatigue group, the neck fatigue group, but did not get worse in the control group who did not have neck fatigue. Now, this is just a lab test, but it's important, right? If we know that visual skills enhance athletic performance, which we know, if we know that neck fatigue decreases visual and postural lab tests and also the ability to replicate specific joint positions, how does that affect us in sport? Right? If my neck is clearly involved in changing direction, or if I play a sport like football, where I'm wearing a helmet, or rugby, where there's lots of head impacts, my neck musculature is going to be highly involved, or even soccer, where I'm changing direction or giving headers, where my neck musculature is obviously very involved. If my neck gets fatigued, how might that affect my performance? I'm thinking about baseball players, for instance. If the neck gets fatigued in baseball, and we know that neck fatigue influences shoulder and elbow proprioception, might that influence a pitcher's ability to recreate the same positions as they release? And might that affect where the ball lands in the strike zone, or if it does land in the strike zone, where these minute millimeters make a big difference, right? What we don't know is how it affects lower body accuracy. To my knowledge, there's been just no research on it. Is it possible that with neck fatigue, lower body motor control and motor accuracy is also impaired? And if that's the case, could there potentially be a link between neck fatigue and ACL tears, for instance, or Achilles tears, or other lower extremity injuries? I don't know. And the research is unclear at this point. To my knowledge, those questions haven't even been asked in the research. And hopefully some of you guys will be able to do some research and answer some of those questions for us. And am I stating that by doing neck training, we're going to save all ACLs and we're going to make pitchers throw 100% accurate strikes? No, of course not. But I'm simply asking the question, does it play a role? Is it important? I think the evidence would suggest that, yeah, there's a link there, and I think it's worth exploring. We're talking about the mechanism of concussions now, so we're actually moving on to concussions, right? The meat of what you guys came for. So the real mechanism, of a concussion, it's rotational head acceleration. So you get hit, your head whips really, really quickly, and then your brain kind of has to catch up from there, and it bounces inside your head and bruises. And there's contusions, right? And that's essentially what causes a concussion. It's about this really fast angular rotation velocity of the head. Most concussions also happen from being hit in the side of the head. Now, I think, I'm not 100% certain of this, I don't think the research is quite clear on this either, but I believe that the reason the concussions are more likely to come from a blow to the side of the head is simply because you can't see it coming. I don't think there's anything more dangerous about being hit in the side versus the front or the back. Certainly concussions can happen from any head impact, right? Hitting the head on the ground and such. But when you can see it coming, you have an opportunity to brace. You can brace your neck musculature. You have an opportunity to move out of the way, to decrease the blow. You've got time. You've got opportunity to react if you see it and you know it's coming. But if you just get hit blindside, maybe like this picture, hit in the side of the head and you don't see it coming, you don't have any of that opportunity to pre-tense or to move, to protect yourself in any way. So I think that's why most literature shows that a direct blow to the side of the head is the primary mechanism of concussion, more so than blows to other places. Again, I was really surprised as I started learning more about the consequences of concussions. And you guys can read the list. I'm not going to read the whole list for you, but I do want to call out the one on the very bottom. I was, again, surprised. In some ways, not surprised. It makes a certain amount of sense, but more, I guess, stunned when I saw that there's a 2 times higher risk of suicide in people who have had concussions versus people who haven't. And that's chilling to me. And it makes me wonder if neck training can prevent concussions. If we implemented neck training on a wide scale and it became pretty normal, might we be saving lives? Might we be saving athlete lives down the road? Certainly, if we can prevent concussions, there's a whole other host of other disorders and symptoms that we may be preventing. But at the end of the day, if we can prevent somebody from committing suicide, I mean, gosh, there's no greater return on an investment than we can possibly imagine, right? So the stakes are obviously very high for brain damage and for concussions. Now, who's at risk? These are just the 6 sports in order according to this 2018 paper that experienced the most concussions were rugby, football, hockey, and soccer, basically. And that's for men and women, right? Men and women ice hockey, men and women soccer. So if you work with athletes in these populations, it might be particularly important for you to consider training their neck. Prevention considerations. There's all kinds of stuff we can do to consider preventing concussions, changing practice structure, obviously gameplay rules, equipment advances. Vision training and reaction time is one of the only things, one of the only modalities that has been shown to effectively reduce concussions. And we're not going to dive into that in this presentation, but my understanding of the literature, my belief on that is the bottom line is it gives you time more than anything else. That's something that I met with Dean Riddle, and he said that we were talking about this exact thing, and that's what he said to me. It gives you time, and that stuck with me when he said that because it just made so much sense. But if I can perceive faster, then I can react faster, right? I have more time. If it takes me this, then this, that's how long it takes me to here, now I can move versus here, now I'm ready. It just gives you those milliseconds in order to be able to move out of the way, in order to be able to pretense to protect, otherwise just protect yourself. So we're not going to dive into the vision training and the reaction training or reaction time training here, but do know that it is important and does play a role. And obviously neck strengthening, right? So diving into a little bit of the neck strengthening literature here. This is probably the most commonly cited paper. And this is the notable quotable here. For every 1 pound increase in neck strength, the odds of concussion decreased by 5%. That's a pretty powerful statistic there. So when I saw this, I wondered to myself, okay, well, how strong can a neck really get? 1 pound of neck increase, I don't know. What's a normative? I had no idea what a neck strength is, right? I mean, we could all spit off some good standards for a bench press or a deadlift or a squat, but what's a good neck muscle strength test? I had no idea. That's a question that I asked myself, and we're going to get there. We'll answer that question, but I also wondered, what does other literature tell us? So here we're saying this is from a 2021 paper review. We're looking at this snapshot shows us 3 papers that they reviewed. That first green rectangle there shows us in those papers how many concussions happened in the intervention group. And that second green rectangle shows us how many concussions happened in the control group. So for that first paper there, Atwood et al., we're seeing 12 concussions in the intervention group, 33 concussions in the control group. So almost 3 times as many concussions in the control group. That's pretty good, right? And so we might be able to say that decreased the likelihood of concussions, right? In fact, this paper would say, yes, that's certain that it did on the far right there. The middle one there, I'm not going to try and pronounce the name. I'll butcher it. This was an interesting paper, 51 concussions in the intervention group and 54 concussions in the control group. So basically no difference there, right? And then in the third group, the Morrissey et al. Paper, only 2 concussions in the intervention group versus 55 concussions in the control group. So when I saw this, what I thought to myself was, what Atwood's doing might be good. Whatever those middle guys are doing obviously didn't work. But what Morrissey's doing, that's the stuff. I want to understand what these guys are doing in order to get these results, right? So I read each of these papers, and that's when I learned that a lot of the literature on neck training is frustratingly nebulous. It's very, very unclear what their exact protocols are. You could not replicate it because it's just not specific. It's not described well enough to understand what they did really at all. We don't know what the exercises were. We don't know what the volumes were in these particular papers. So from an applied practitioner standpoint, like us, people who actually work with athletes, and I want to know, Okay, great. There's a reduction in concussion. What did you do so that I can try and do it too? You're not going to get it from a lot of these papers, including these three. So that was incredibly frustrating. But we are going to, we'll circle back to that point. I'm not going to leave you with that big cliffhanger, don't worry. But it made me also wonder, I mean, what more from the studies can we find? And is neck training conclusive? And the more you read, the more you find that not every study will show you that neck training does reduce concussion risk. And it'd be dishonest not to recognize that. So this is another review. I think this one is from 2022, from last year, I believe it is. And there in the highlighted section, basically what that tells us, of the 22 studies that they reviewed that looked at neck training and neck, sort of the neck influence on concussion mitigation, only 14 of the 22 found that there was an association between neck strengthening and neck health in general and concussion mitigation. So that it's certainly not conclusive, but it's 14 out of 22. That's 64% of the papers that they reviewed did show a protective factor. 64%, that is a big percentage. Now, some of these papers, I haven't read all of them, right? I haven't read all 22 of these studies, but I did read a handful of them. Some of the methods were not what many strength and conditioning professionals would consider high quality strength and conditioning. So some of what they considered neck training, most of us would look at and probably not consider true neck training. So I look at some of the stuff and it's like rolling on the ground. And I'm sure there's benefits to that particular exercise, but just rolling back and forth for 30 seconds on your back, like you're rocking, almost like a ball, just rolling back and forth on your back for 30 seconds and then turning your head and doing the same thing. I don't know if you can really hardly consider that neck training. There's certainly vestibular things going on. I'm sure other things going on. But that was one of the exercises in the paper. And that's all they did. They rolled on the ground for 30 seconds and they called it neck training. There was no relationship of pre and post of neck strength that they measured for or could show. And they called that neck training, right? So for a paper like that, whether it does or does not show an association between neck work and concussion, we have to ask how applied is that? But then there's several other papers that do it really, really well. That as strength and conditioning coaches, we love to see. This is one of them. So they detailed their exercises. You see it in the picture here. You can see exactly what she's doing. She's got a band. She's working into neck extension. Their volume and their protocol is very clearly laid out. They did this protocol 3 times per week, so it was a lot of volume. It was 4 exercises. So for week 1, they did 4 sets of those, each of one set of those 4 exercises 3 times per week, like on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it just progresses linearly, as you can see the rep scheme there. And they strength tested, right? So we have actual data pre and post. It wasn't just, hey, we did some neck training and we'll see what happened at the end of the season, but they actually collected data. And after 6 weeks, you see the strength improvements here. So now circling back to that first paper where I showed that a 1 pound reduction or 1 pound improvement in neck strength equals a 5% reduction in concussion risk. Again, I was asking myself, well, how much stronger can a neck possibly get? I mean, is 2 pounds, 3 pounds? What's a good increase? So here we're seeing like 8-pound increases, from the anterior strength pre and post. And again, this is just in 6 weeks. I got 8 pounds of increase of torque there. And it's almost a 50% increase from 20 to 28. So if my math is right, it's 8 pounds increase, 8 times 5% is 40%. Now we're talking a legitimate concussion reduction, 40% reduction in concussion risk. We're turning some heads. That's worthwhile training there. One last note here. So this is on timing and tension. Back to the Boynton and Carrier 2022 paper. So this is the one that talked about the neck and its relationship to the pelvis. They noted in that paper in their discussion the interactions between neck strength and concussion risk. And one thing that they found essentially was that they're suggesting that the locomotor activity of the neck, so your neck is just active while you're playing sports, right? When you're changing direction, you're cutting, you're sprinting, your neck is active to stabilize your head and do other tasks. So they're suggesting that perhaps for blindside hits, that level of natural pre-tension is maybe the most protective factor that we have, if not the only protective factor that we have outside of equipment for hits against, or for protection against blindside hits that might cause a concussion, right? So then this made sense to me, just a certain level of pre-tension might be protective. So then I asked myself, if pre-tension is important, as my neck gets stronger through training, do I generate more force through that pre-tension, that kind of locomotive tension? So in other words, if my neck expresses a certain amount of force as I'm changing direction or accelerating or sprinting, if my neck gets stronger, does it express more force during those same movement patterns? And if it does, might that prove this hypothesis that pre-tension level is really important for protective factors against concussions that from blindside hits that you don't see coming. Again, this question is unanswered, but to me, it makes sense that as your neck gets stronger, that level of pre-tension would also increase while you're doing sports movements. So this, to me, further solidified the importance of training a neck and how important the neck really is in terms of concussion mitigation. So final poll here. To me, neck training seems like a moral obligation. If we believe that neck training can save athletes from concussion, which I do believe the research in the literature is strong enough to make that jump, is neck training a moral obligation? I would say so. So our poll here, so go ahead and go over to the polls. The final poll there. If it costs little time, effort, and money, and has a strong chance to prevent concussion, would you consider adding neck training with your athletes? And guys, here's the kicker. I've been doing neck training with many of the athletes I work with. It doesn't take very long. It doesn't have to be 3 times a week. I mean, we're talking 6 to 8 sets a week. You add it in once or twice a week. You do 2 sets in different directions. We're going to go through some of the exercises here shortly. It does not have to be a big time commitment. Certainly doesn't have to be a big financial commitment. You can get good, solid neck results from low volume training. All right, we'll close that poll. 100% of us said yeah. So if it's cost little time, effort, and money, would you consider doing it? Everybody says yes. Good. So before we talk about training, talk about real quickly contraindications, Down syndrome, clinical hypermobility, and then any like EDS or peripheral numbness and tingling sensations. If your population has any of these present, neck training is a no-go for them. And for Down, you might be asking why Down syndrome. Very common with Down syndrome, their cervical spine doesn't have the same anatomy and architecture as those without Down syndrome, and it's more mobile. So those with Down syndrome are more susceptible to neck injuries in general. Particularly, there's a little bit more of an anterior posterior laxity movement. So on rare cases, if their cervical spine actually gets hit with the right force at the right time, it can slide anteriorly and posteriorly and actually sever or damage the spinal cord there. So that's the reason why for Down syndrome. Same thing with clinical hypermobility. If you have somebody who's diagnosed with a clinical grade of hypermobility, the same issue is present, so don't do it. And then if you get any peripheral numbness and tingling, just stop neck training, nervy going on there. So we have to talk real briefly about those contraindications. So assessing the neck, range of motion. We have to start with range of motion. Now, I'll preface this by saying this is best done by medical staff. And this is kind of high-level assessment stuff, and most strength coaches are not, I would assume, trained to take neck measurements. I know I'm certainly not comfortable putting my hands on somebody's head, moving their head around, and taking those measurements, at least as of right now. But it's important also from a prevention perspective here. So this is a really fascinating paper. Essentially, what they did was measure neck range of motion from a rotation perspective in pitchers. They let them play all season, and then they noted which ones got hurt. And sure enough, those who had limited cervical range of motion experienced more shoulder and elbow injuries. And there's some conjecture as to why they thought that was. We're not going to dive super deep into that. But this is another layer that we're adding into the high performance neck model, even understanding that neck range of motion plays an important role. I mean, we can talk briefly. I was a quarterback for a time, switched positions and played something different in college, but I was quarterback for most of my life. Obviously, if you're turned here and you're looking downfield, this requires a certain amount of neck range of motion, right? And if I can only turn my neck here, but I want to look that way, I'm going to wind up rotating the rest of my body in order to get my head facing in that direction, right? So if I face the camera here, if I want to look right at the camera, but I don't have the neck mobility, I'm just going to wind up rotating the rest of my body. Now, obviously, that affects my positioning, and how does that affect my ability to throw? And it's just kind of the same concept for pitchers. Obviously, they experience a lot more rotation systemically than a quarterback does. But if they're lacking that range of motion in the neck, then it's going to show up somewhere else down the chain. In this case, in their shoulders and elbows. Now, from a force perspective, there's lots of ways we can calculate neck strength. You can do it something as simple as a digital crane scale for like $80 on Amazon. You can attach it and they can pull on it in different directions. And we'll show some of those videos here shortly. You can use a handheld dynamometer. That's shown right next to it. That's a Vald model. I've not used it, but I've seen it in person and I've seen it in use. And it is pretty slick. It's pretty cool. So you can test in different ways. It's quick and dirty assessments, again, with the crane scale or with the handheld dynamometer. But I think assessing that force is important. That way, not only do you have the data to potentially protect yourself in case of a concussion and in case you need to, but all the other reasons that data is important to be able to show the athletes that they're making progress, to be able to prove to yourself that your protocols are working and that you're making progress. So it's important to collect this data and not just guess that what you're doing is working. I will say on the data hygiene and collection standpoint, Fit, they do a really good job. The guys at Fit were real clear with me. Hey, this isn't, you don't have to talk about Fit. You don't have to push Fit. Your job is only to give highest level information. But I'm a Fit user. I train several teams through it. And it's just so easy to upload the KPIs and to upload everybody's performance values into Fit. You can track it over time. You can give performance reports. So one of the teams that I'm working with is a softball team. So 0 to 60-foot sprint to first base. Here's an athlete or two athletes. We see their sprint times going down. We see their fitness tests, fitness levels going up. It's just so easy to report. Even with the wellness questionnaires, athletes do wellness questionnaires daily, and the reports show up just like this. So if I see a big spike in their stress levels, I can notify their coach, and the coach has access to the report as well. So that many of the coaches just pull the reports and they monitor it daily to see how their athletes are doing. That's a good conversation starter. Other really nice thing about Fit that's particularly important for this topic of testing is you can automate training protocols based on athlete test levels. So this is just an example I pulled from the Fit website. But essentially what we're seeing here is in the top block, there's a football testing block. So you collect all your data, you upload all the data into Fit, and then based on parameters that you predefine, it'll assess the data, and then it'll plug the athletes into their training groups from there based on what you find. So just in this generic example, there's a core, basically a core training, a lower body training, and an upper body training. So there's 3 different like training programs that you would bucket the athletes into. And Fit does this for you automatically based on the test results. So this is really, really cool. So in terms of neck training, you might notice that from an anterior perspective, they're really strong. From a posterior perspective, they're really strong. But from a lateral perspective, they're really weak. You can use that data to bucket the athletes into a more lateral force biased training program, just in order to customize it. And it happens automatically, which just saves you a lot of time. So it's really nice. But to the actual training, so a simple progression is just starting with isometrics, then moving on to isotonic training, and then lastly, dynamic isometric. Now, you're probably thinking, what dynamic isometric? What does that mean? You'll see when we get there. I didn't know what else to call it. You guys probably have a better idea for it than I do. So here's some quick examples of isometric training. On the left here, she's just got like an AirX pad and she's leaning into a wall. On the right, this is taken from an article from William Wayland on Simply Faster. The link is down there at the bottom. He does really great work with the neck and all kinds of stuff. He seems like a really great trainer. But this is a really cool. I've done this exercise with some athletes as well. They're just kind of leaning into you and you kind of guide them down and then you very gently push them back up. And you can do that in all 4 directions. That works really well isometrically. You can replicate ISOs. I've seen it done this way. There's obviously a safety bar, but you can use like a squat sponge on a bar. Just this morning, I saw, I think on LinkedIn, somebody was posting isometrics just like this, but from a bench. And they're having athletes essentially do like a glute bridge. And they had the bench on the back of their head and they were supporting themselves and they're doing it from a side lunge and then kind of bent over with their forehead on the bench as well. So, I mean, you can recreate this any way you want. I've seen videos of people doing it with stability balls on a wall instead of doing it on a bar. So lots of ways to do that. So now we're moving on to the isotonic examples. This is an iron neck. You guys might be familiar with iron necks. They have different like grades, industry level grades of the product. This is kind of like the mid-level. I got it. They sell it on Amazon. I think it was like $70 or $80. I got this. It's really nice because it's got those attachments there on the sides, each side, front, back, and then laterally, and then kind of the earrings there. You see those as well. You can attach and do things there. And so this is where you get to some of the isotonics. I know this might not technically be isotonic because it's a band and it's not, so therefore the weight is not, load is not constant, but I think you get what I mean, right? We're actually moving. We're not just staying still, static like isometric. So this is obviously an example of a lateral flexion down there. Here we see an extension example. She really loves these. You can tell by the smile there. All right, this is a rotation. She really loved this picture too. She was thrilled that I was using this with her permission, of course, in the in the presentation. But just from a practical perspective, I found that attaching the band or the cable to the back instead of the front is easier. When it goes in the front, it gets in their face, and that's uncomfortable. So the start position is on the left here, which is actually turning to the side, and she's turning into the resistance back to neutral. And then you could continue turning, the other way, obviously, to get more. But it's interesting because the concentric is actually back to neutral. And then as you relax, it pulls you back in that direction. So here's part of the dynamic isometrics I was talking about. Again, I didn't know what else to call them. Just keeping the head still so you're not like tilting, but the body's moving. You're doing different things with your body. So in this case, it's a side lunge. So he's stepping out. And I think I actually have a video of this one. Yeah, lateral lunge. Watch this kid doing this. So again, he's got a band attached and he's stepping out to the side, right? And this kid's actually got a really interesting story. He was a Division I football player, but he played one more video here with bear crawls, same athlete. This one's exceptionally challenging. Looks like it's just taking its time to load a little bit, but bear crawling with the weight is exceptionally challenging. And, it's interesting. He noted that after doing some of these exercises, when he takes the weight off, he feels a little bit dizzy. It's almost like he's spinning, and then you stop, and the wheel continues spinning. He says, I just have to calibrate just for a split second. I'm thinking to myself, hey, there's the vestibular interactions with the neck. But this kid's story, I pulled the presentation back up here as well. When he was a senior in high school, he had a freak neck injury. Sorry, speed forward to where we were, but he had a freak neck injury and got hit during a playoff game. He actually went paralyzed from his neck down for about 6 hours. And then slowly he regained sensation and he was able to move again. And then, so I met him about 4 months later. He was going off to play college ball. It was in January, I think, January or February when I met him. I brought him in for training, thinking to myself, man, this kid's got some courage to literally be paralyzed for about 6 hours and then want to put a helmet back on. So we trained together. So before I knew very much about neck work, and we didn't do any neck work at that time. So he goes off to college, and unfortunately he has the same injury in camp his freshman year. And so he's hung up the cleats, he's hung up the helmet, he's back to track, he's throwing jab again, but he keeps talking about maybe I'll try and go back, and I'm just urging him to act with caution. But so now we're doing neck training with him, and again, I don't necessarily think that for a javelin thrower, neck training is the most important piece. But if he's got something going on with the cervical spine, where he's been cleared to do these exercises by his doctor, but there's something going on there. He's expressed to me a certain amount of fear. He says, hey, the reason I want to come in and continue training is because I don't want something bad to happen in my future, whether I play football again or whether it's in a car accident. I want to continue strengthening my neck to make sure that I'm good to go for my life. So the kid's got a certain amount of reasonable and understandable fear. And I think it's important for him to continue training, if for nothing else, to just give him a little bit of peace of mind. But hopefully we are making a difference and making a dent in some of his risk down the road. So a simple training program here. First 2 weeks, work on isometrics. Weeks 3 to 4, do some basic isotonics, seated stuff, pulling different directions. You can rotate, flex, extend, lateral flexion. And then in weeks 5 to 6, do more of the dynamic stuff, the side lunges, the bear crawls. And you can do things like have them just walk straight out, kind of like the lateral lunges, but just have them walk. So we have a 1080 sprint, and I hook it up to the 1080 sprint, and I'll have him walk forward 10, 15 meters, and then he'll walk backwards, and the sprint is still pulling him. So it's like an eccentric stimulus. And we'll do the same thing in all 4 directions. It's almost like a four-way neck, walking forward, sideways, backwards, and then sideways the other ways. Just to get that neck used to creating tension while the rest of your body is moving. It's a little bit more integrated that way. Good. All right, that concludes the bulk of the presentation. Happy to take questions now. Remember, if you have questions, please throw them into the questions section there. That's where I'm looking. I'm not necessarily watching the chat. but feel free to throw them in the questions segment. All right, we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. Not seeing any questions come in quite yet. Here we go. So Jared's asking, is there a clear difference between manual resistance and using fixed bands and weight? No, I think the biggest difference is that with manual resistance, obviously you're probably mostly, well, I guess you could do isotonics, but I think manual resistance is probably best suited for isometrics. Whereas the bands and the weights, it's a little bit probably safer to do the isotonics and the dynamic stuff that way. But no, in the literature, there's not really a big difference between them. In fact, the isometrics and the isotonics have both been called neck training in the neck prevention literature, and they've both been shown to have a protective effect there. So, for me, it's like any literature, right? If you do a 6-week study of isometric, like quad work or whatever, it doesn't mean that you should never do anything other than isometrics, but it does show that it's a piece of the puzzle. And so that's what I think the isometrics are. They're a piece of the puzzle. I think the isotonics are a piece of the puzzle, and we should work them all in. You got it, Jared. So Alex asks if I prescribe any specific neck mobility exercises. I leave that to the medical team. I'm in a very unique situation where I'm a performance trainer out of a sports medicine facility. So I work alongside sports PTs. I recognize not everybody's in that position. But no, I don't. So I don't do any prescription of the mobility stuff. If there's an issue, I'll let the PTs kind of address that. That way I can focus strictly on the performance stuff. Yeah, you got it, Alex. So Victoria asked if there's any info in my research about a chin tuck position for neutral C-spine stabilization versus cervical extension for training. I didn't come across any literature there, so I can't give you an answer based on the literature, but I would think that tucking the chin probably wouldn't create as much. I think tucking the chin and going into like this hyperflex position is a bit unnatural and probably not where the neck is most stable, but I could be wrong. I do remember that advice when I was a young athlete 10, 12 years ago of always like packing the chin and doing this before you deadlift and squat and all this stuff. And boy, that definitely seems like it was 10, 12 years ago. And I don't coach that way and haven't heard anybody coach that way in a while. Awesome. Well, hey guys, here's my contact info. If you guys have any questions about anything, that's my email address. You can find me on Twitter as well. Feel free to shoot me an email or tag me in a tweet. I want to say thank you to the guys that fit, Ernie and the rest of the gang. You guys have been really great, accommodating in this process. Thank you for giving me the platform to share this really, really important information. I appreciate you guys. For everybody listening afterwards, I know not everybody was able to attend live. Thank you guys for listening. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, send me a tweet, contact me, and we'll make it happen. All right. Hey, thank you guys very much. Y'all have a wonderful night.